birth is power. Like women who birth in their natural state and feel everything, it's it's power. It's powerful. It changes you.
Welcome to Intuition Unlocked, the podcast for women who feel overwhelmed, disconnected, or like the version of themselves they're living no longer fits. This space empowers you to trust your intuition, restore inner and outer coherence, and reclaim self-trust so you can show up more clear, bold, and self-led in your life. I'm your host, Olivia Ashley, and I'm so glad you're here. Hello, friends, and welcome back to Intuition Unlocked. It's your host, Olivia, and I'm so happy to have you here for today's episode because this is such a tender, powerful, and deeply important conversation. One that invites us to remember birth not as something to fear, but as something that is sacred, intuitive, and truly transformative. My guest today is Kayla Gomez, a nurse midwife, women's wellness practitioner, and the owner of Sacred Birth Midwifery in Colorado Springs. Kayla holds such a beautiful balance of science, spirit, and deep reverence for women, and I'm especially honored to share this conversation because she was also my midwife for my most recent home birth. In this episode, you will hear us explore why birth is a profound rite of passage, how women can reclaim trust in their bodies, babies, and intuition, and what it would look like if our culture truly honored mothers before, during, and after birth. This conversation is full of wisdom, remembrance, and a powerful return to what so many women deeply need. So settle in, and I hope you enjoy this beautiful conversation with Kayla. Welcome, Kayla. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here as well, too.
Yes, and I feel like this is really special because you held me through the whole last year, through my pregnancy and birth, and now I get to bring you on and learn more about you and your amazing journey into midwifery and everything that you love. So I'd like to start by having you share about that journey, that what brought you into midwifery and what led you to devote your life to guiding women through one of the most sacred thresholds really we will ever cross.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I know. I think one of my favorite parts about this work and this specific type of midwifery is the relationships that I get to make with families. And it becomes so much more than just professional client and midwife, but we become friends and we develop these soul level connections. And so it is really special. It's special to sit with you in a different sphere outside of just pregnancy. And it just feels really special and full circle. But yeah, thank you for the question. So, my journey into midwifery, at least for me, it always seemed like kind of odd and nonsensical, at least like when I was sitting in my midwifery cohort or when I was first meeting midwives when I first started this work, it seemed like everyone had a journey and a path that started somewhere as like in labor and delivery in the hospital, or they were a doula or a birth worker of some sort. So I always kind of felt like really odd. I didn't have any of that kind of connection to birth before I decided to be a midwife. It was a very different type of calling, I guess you could say, but a little bit my background. I've been a nurse. I was a nurse before I decided to become a midwife, and I'm a nurse midwife. I've always had like a really strong pull towards holistic health and healing. And so I worked as a nurse in psychiatry for about 7 years, which I really loved. I loved mental health. And also that work informs a lot of the work that I do as a midwife as well, too. But after a while, started to get burnt out of the hospital system and started to try and think about what I wanted to do next. I had gotten my certification in yoga and Ayurveda, and I was starting to think about herbalism. And I fell into this shamanic herbalism program. And this one, I was out living in Washington at the time. And so I fell into this shamanic herbal apprenticeship program thinking that I was going to become an herbalist. And actually, what happened through the program was this whole kind of awakening and integration with my feminine self and my maternal lineage. And I started connecting with my ancestors. And I also learned what the midwife was. So I actually didn't really know that midwifery was still a thing like today. I didn't know that midwives were still in practice. I thought it was just this like, long time ago and the time of like witches kind of thing. which is really funny to think about now. But my teacher, she gave us all a book. I think it was called The Woman in the Shaman's Body. And basically, that book talked about the history of like women's health. And long time ago, in the time when we were more like village centered, the midwife was the community healer. That was the wise woman healer. And they weren't just healing women with like your general women's health, but they were also attending birth. They were like all the things. Like the midwife didn't just attend birth, but she attended women in their healing throughout their lifespan from puberty all the way to like menopause. And that like really drew me in, like something cellular, and my body woke up and it was just like, oh my gosh, like that's what I have been looking for. Like it's almost like I was like fragmented at the time. I was learning all these different skills and then they were all coming together in midwifery. And I was like, that's what I've been searching for is the midwife. And I also felt like that was also a part of who I've always been. I just knew it didn't make sense on the outside, but I just knew that that was where I was supposed to go. So that's kind of what started the catalyst. And then because I was already a nurse at the time, so I went to school at the University of Washington and I realized they had a nurse midwifery program. So I looked at the nurse midwifery program, and I still like naive in a lot of ways because I had just kind of like jumped into this thing, not really knowing a lot about the like political and modern landscape of birth. And so, I read the description of nurse midwifery and I was like, yeah, this is great. Like holistic women's health, normal physiology of birth. And I can go right into it in my nursing license. And I always say too, like, because I was like, I had like a moment of doubt in the external because I was like, this makes no sense. Like, I've been in psych. I don't know anything about babies. I didn't have babies myself. I didn't have really anyone in my family were having babies other than when I was younger. The only job I've really ever had before being a nurse was working in daycares, and I loved working with babies. I actually wanted to be a peds nurse before I ended up in psych. But other than that, I really didn't have the experience of birth or pregnancy or really women in that my life at all. So I was like, is this kind of crazy? This doesn't really make any sense. So I remember I sat my husband down because he's very logical and very practical and very like matter of fact, and I was like nervous to tell him because I was like, this doesn't make any sense. And I was like, look, I'm thinking about going back to school to be a nurse midwife, and I'll just never forget. And he was just like, yes. He's like, that's exactly like who you are. And I just was like, what? Because I just, I had like never thought about it. So that was the first two that like that confirmation that like, okay. And so I went into school. And then I think because even though I didn't have experience in any birth work, my pull into midwifery was from this more holistic place of like village healer, natural health, like normal. And I knew a little bit about home birth. Like I had watched The Business of Being Born and that kind of thing. So I had a very idealized vision of birth, seeing it at home and doing all this. And then when I went to school, it was almost kind of like a rude awakening. And I learned about how medicalized birth is. And school was really, really, really hard. Even though I was in Seattle and I was in Washington, and it was more of a kind of like hippie, holistic place. My counselor, she had home birth herself. Everyone is like supportive of the idea of physiological birth, but then it's like we're being trained in this like really harsh medical system, and like the conflict is, very intense. So school was really hard. And I also went to school during COVID. But I knew, and I think it only even just became more solidified in school that I always wanted to practice at home. Being in school and being in the hospitals taught me everything that I know I didn't want to do. And it just like further pushed that desire for me to work at home. I got to do a couple of my rotations in a home birth and a birth center, like through the support of my counselor, which was really special. And that kind of helped balance the scales a little bit of the intensity of like the medical side of school. But as soon as I graduated, I looked for the first home birth job that I could find as a nurse midwife, which was another rude awakening. I feel like I always do things the hard way. Like another rude awakening was like, oh, nurse midwives don't actually work at home. There's this whole other type of midwife and midwifery. But I was lucky enough to find a nurse midwife practice here in Colorado, which has brought me here where we are today. And yeah, that pretty much started my journey into home birth, which I don't feel like I could ever work anyplace else.
Mm, that is beautiful. And I think it's actually makes sense that you had to do the things you had to do where you started and maybe you really loved it, but it didn't quite sit right. And then you had to learn because I think if you just landed without having the experiences that you had, you might not have ended up where you are with what reverence and what truly embodied wisdom that you seem to hold and bring to your work, which is why I was really drawn to you and what you do because I could tell that you understood what I was wanting as a mother who had been through multiple births beforehand. Even though I've never had a hospital birth, they were birth center births. And they started
Mhm.
out really holistic, really supportive. And the more I had, I think the more clinical it became. And that's when I learned I think what I'm really wanting is home birth. But it's scary. And there's all those aspects that we are shown to fear it. But that's where when I found you, I saw that you held so much science with the spirit in your work that I knew I could trust you and be safe with you. And so I'd love for you to share how you personally integrate some of that evidence-based safety with your
Mhm.
intuitive knowing into birth work.
So I've always been a very intuitive person, but what something that I feel like you probably like just through your podcast like talk about a lot and you would probably understand and resonate with is like when we're younger, a lot of those like sensitive, more intuitive skills that we have kind of get beaten out of us. And so as I got older, I kind of got more and more dominant in my left brain. And I love to read. I love to learn. I love science. That's part of what drove me into nursing as well, too. But I've also always had this just like really deep knowing. I've always just been like very intuitive. And then as I've gotten older and realized, the benefits of that versus what we're conditioned when we're younger, I strengthen that connection with myself and that intuition. So I think sometimes that's why I end up doing things the hard way as well too, because I just know something before I can really explain it or make it make sense. So even though I'm going through this harsh medical path in my body, I just knew that birth was normal. I just knew that it was wrong before anybody had to tell me that it was wrong, what I was witnessing in the hospital. I could just feel in my body that it was wrong. So I've always had that really strong intuition. And so I think holding that space, though, for women to be in their intuition in the landscape of, how medical and political birth can be really hard. And it's something, that I'm constantly working with. So information, is in abundance. There's a lot of information, you just have to want to seek it to learn it. So I think part of how I integrate that is I believe that knowledge is power. And for me, what I tell my moms, what I believe is true informed consent is both knowledge and intuition. So I really strive in my practice to offer that to mothers. And the way I do that by providing as much information as I can and then holding space for them to be in their intuitive space. And I do believe that all women, and especially pregnant women, are intuitive. And when you're pregnant, more intuitive than you will ever be at any other time in your life. However, a lot of women today are very disembodied and conditioned to not trust their knowings. But the problem is that there's so much mystery in pregnancy and birth. We have a good amount of information and research when it comes to birth and pregnancy. We can know to a certain extent certain things, but then there's a lot that we don't know and may never know. And there's a lot that people aren't looking into, and there's a lot that we just may never know because birth and pregnancy is mysterious. And I think it's really important for us to hold space to allow for that mystery because I believe that that mystery is part of what makes it so sacred and what makes it that sacred rite of passage. The way that I try to do that for moms is to allow opportunity for them to be in their intuition. I truly do believe that moms are the experts in their pregnancy and their bodies. I truly believe that every mother knows exactly what she needs for her birth and for her pregnancy and what is right for her. And so I think it's just working with different skills and different practices throughout pregnancy to create more space for moms to allow to be in that intuition and to be more embodied in their pregnancy.
I cannot say that any better. That was so beautiful, and I love it so much. I think it resonates so much. And yet, sadly, not what we're taught, not what we're told. And yet, you do this in such a beautiful way that I'm curious what you have witnessed in the women that you hold when they feel
Mm.
genuinely safe and supported through their pregnancy and birth. What changes within them, whether it's their nervous system, the body, or their own experience? And why is that so significant during this process?
hmm I mean, it's huge. It's catastrophic. Like a lot of times when I'm explaining when women and families are coming to me for a consult and we're explaining the benefits of midwifery or like having a doula in birth, it's just that it's explaining how support and encouragement is like night and day in your birth and your pregnancy experience. When you're given permission to know that things are normal and to know that you're safe and to know that you have the answers, then that becomes unlocked within you. It's really just like holding permission, and that support and that love allows the more beneficial hormones to flow in labor and birth rather than anxiety and adrenaline. So I think, like, to put it kind of in the way that you asked, a lot of what I see is I see a physical relaxing of women's bodies. And then as far as their nervous system goes, you're making decisions from a place of clarity and a place of trust and a place of inner knowing rather than a place of fear and anxiety and pressure. And that's just night and day. Like, for a woman to be able to feel calm and safe and centered and trustful in her pregnancy rather than fearful and stressed, that makes all the difference in the health of their baby and the health of their pregnancy. It's that ability for them to be able to tap into their inner knowing. And I think this is really important because what I've also found is that when women are given the space to be in their intuition, to be able to make decisions from their place of inner knowing, rather than outsourcing their power, they're insourcing. And regardless of what happens in their birth experience, the outcome is still better because they know that no matter what happened, that decision was theirs and they were given love and support and comfort to make that decision.
Absolutely. That speaks volumes too. And from my own experience, I felt it so deeply what you were able to offer as the container. Because, like what you're saying is, yes, you show up and you hold this space and you help us through this process. But in reality, it's us as the mother who is doing it, right? The one who's pregnant moving through it. And so I'm curious, why do you think our culture has so often framed birth as dangerous, pain-filled, and something
Mm.
that must be controlled in a very specific way and environment to be safe? When in reality, I think some of the safest places is our home.
When I think of that question, I think of like three major themes. And the first one is birth is power. Like women who birth in their natural state and feel everything, it's it's power, it's powerful, it changes you. You cannot be manipulated anymore. You cannot be controlled anymore. Like once you understand how much power you have coursing through your body and your veins, what you're literally made to do, what you're capable of, that changes you and it changes society. And I do think that on a cultural and societal level, we know that. I mean, a lot of people talk about, you can go down like the pathway of feminism, and we can talk about how women have been oppressed in certain ways in society. And in my opinion, I think one of the biggest ways that we have oppressed women is by taking away birth, is by taking birth away from them and giving it to men in hospital systems. That's been one of the biggest ways that we have disempowered and oppressed women because birth is power. And you can even take that from like an energetic place as well too. Like you don't have to birth a literal baby to know that like as a woman, like your womb is your source of power and creation. And when that is intact and flowing in you, like you're unstoppable. So I think that's a big part. And then I guess to kind of like continue on from that, the second theme being that since we did take birth away from women and families and we put it into the hands of hospital systems and doctors, and there's a whole history of that that we could get into. But now, birth has become this monetization, it makes a lot of money in hospitals and doctors, and it's a whole profession that exists now. And pain is a great marketing tactic, making women afraid of pain and then afraid of themselves and then afraid of their ability is a great marketing tactic for an epidural and for a hospital. They come swooping in as a savior complex and, hey, I can save you. I can make this easier. You don't have to experience all of these things. But that also just gets into the larger conversation of rite of passage and transformation and how I think like on a societal level to like today in our modern lives, we seek a lot of comfort. The more technology that we create, we create nicer houses, more comfortable things, and we get further and further away from our natural state as a part of nature. And we get more and more comfortable with being comfortable. And anything that is uncomfortable is seen as like wrong or bad or traumatizing. And I don't think that's true. I think how we're held when things are challenging or uncomfortable is what determines if it makes it or breaks us, not the discomfort itself. I think you can like parallel that with grief work and all kinds of things. But yeah, it's great marketing for the hospital. And then the last thing I will just say, I think another big part of it is our cultural's relationship with death, which is pretty much non-existent. I think that we want to control birth because we want to control life. And one of the things that we've really lost as a culture, apart from the sacredness of pregnancy and birth, is also the sacredness of death. And that same thing of mystery that you can't control it. And I think, in my opinion, in the midwifery model of care, birth isn't something that we're meant to control. It's something that we're meant to experience, we're meant to surrender to, and we're meant to allow it to change us and unravel us. But sometimes that means death is on the other side of that. And I think many families, many mothers, and for certain society are unwilling to allow death as a part of that experience. And that then translates to this entire system of healthcare that we have today of licensure, and that we're required to do certain things. And, women's autonomy is diminished because we just have this entire culture that is centered around making sure that the baby is alive despite any other cost. Like, no matter how the mother feels, no matter the benefits of physiological birth, no matter any of those benefits, none of it matters. All that matters is that the baby is alive. And of course, I know that you know this, and I'm sure your listeners as well too. It's not that we don't want our babies to be alive, and babies that don't stay in the earth realm, it's devastating. But it also goes into that like grief is also a portal, and grief is also sacred, and death is sacred, and they're meant to teach us things. But we're losing all of that because we've completely closed ourselves off to that experience, like just something that we don't want to have. And you can even look at that as just like death in general, even of, elderly people. Like, we spend so much money to keep people alive, despite their quality of life might be like nothing, or they might be in like so much pain. Some of them even want to go, but we can't let go. Family members have a hard time letting go of family members who are close to death. And same thing, the medical system as well, too. It's all centered in malpractice, and that the only thing that matters is that people are alive. And that's just a big disconnect. We're closed off to an entire world that exists, this world of death and what it means.
I want you just to keep telling me more in terms of this space because, wow, it's very powerful what you're talking about. And I love that you frame it in that way of birth is power. And when women don't get to experience the fullness of it because of the pain, because of their fear, whatever that is, I think they lose out on something that can be very much a catalyzer. It can change their life, transform themselves. I am definitely not the
Mhm.
same person after every birth that I have gone through. We don't choose pain. We choose our babies. We choose the trust in our bodies. And so I'd like you just to keep telling us more about what you feel has quietly been eroded in women's care, both for mothers and babies over these last few generations. And how does midwifery reclaim this power for us in these spaces? But just in general, I think this is probably one specific conversation and topic that probably illuminates a lot more in women's care. But I'd love to hear what else you have from your perspective.
I love that question. It's such an important question because I feel like one of the things that's been so eroded in women's healthcare is body literacy. And like you said, it kind of does go to this entire system of healthcare. Like you could say, not even just women's health, but all aspects of health. We have been taught and conditioned that we don't know, and that only those who have gone to school and have the white coats and have the letters after their name know what's best for you and know what you need. And I believe that that is just not true. And to center it back down into women's health, body literacy, our access to understanding how our bodies work on a biological level, energetic, emotional, physical, that wasn't always something that was like that only existed for those who went to school to choose to learn about it, right? Back in the time of like the wisdom cultures, that was access that all women had. That was a part of just normal life and normal community as little girls grew up and they understood how their bodies worked and what they need. And that allowed for them to engage in reproductive activities and birth and of that sort with more sacredness and more understanding because they understood how it worked. And I think especially when I see, mothers and families coming to me and starting to go down this path of home birth and natural birth, is that's often the biggest disconnect that I see is just this idea that they don't know what they need and that they're coming to me to tell them how to do it, when to do it, tell me what to do. And we can know. I think as women, we biologically are written and designed in a way to know exactly what we need. And for babies, I think one of the biggest thing is honestly how we treat mothers or don't treat mothers, like really don't take care of mothers. I'm of the belief that I feel like the most important thing that a baby needs to be well is for their mothers to be well. And I think our current medical paradigm of pregnancy and birth really centers like a lot of tests and exams and focus is all centered on the baby. And again, like, what I was speaking to before, because we're all so obsessed with this idea that this baby has to be born alive. So everything is so focused on the baby that moms often get left, like how they feel, what they know, what they believe to be true. It's not considered to be valuable. Like the medical model does not value a woman's intuition or what she knows to be best for her at all. If you can't scientifically prove it, then it's irrelevant and it doesn't matter. So the midwifery model reclaims both of these things. Like the midwifery model, because in the true midwifery model, because we believe that women are the experts in their pregnancy and their birth and their bodies and their experience, that's the kind of care that we hold, that mother-led, woman-led cares that we hold space. We consider your intuition and your personal knowledge is valuable. It does matter when we're creating a care plan of safety for your baby, right? A mother's intention is that her baby is born alive. To think that she doesn't have any valuable information when it's her baby is just kind of crazy. It's just been so dismissive. So yeah, I think through the midwifery model of care, by centering women as the leaders of their care, and then also focusing our care on nourishing mothers, like at the same time. So valuing their input and then nourishing, making sure that they feel safe, that they feel held, that they feel supported, because we know that that's going to be the best medicine and treatment and care for the well-being of that baby and then her birth.
Absolutely. It does start with the mother. And I'm curious, when you say you trust the woman's intuition in their pregnancy and birth, what does that look like in real
Mhm.
time for someone who maybe has never heard of this or is attempting to do so, but really struggles to do that? And knowing that we all come from that very disconnected self. We don't always know what we're feeling or what our body is signaling us or babies are signaling us. How do you support them in this model of care?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think through offering different kinds of practices like somatic practices, things like meditation and yoga, things that start to help women pull away from their left brain and create space for them to be in their right brain and create space with them to start connecting with their bodies. Simple things like pleasure exercises, like starting to ask women, what do you want? What is your favorite color? Like, how does this sensation feel? Do you like soft sensations, rough sensations? I mean, it's really mind-blowing, honestly and truly, like how many women I come into contact with who have no idea what they want or no idea what they like. I always tell women this is one of the biggest things that we do work on is that pregnancy, it's an initiation of many things, but one of the things that I think it is a really initiation to is women reclaiming their own power back because when you are pregnant, it's an opportunity to see all of the ways in which you are so outsourced and women's are people pleasers. In society and culture, like what do we teach little girls, right? Like be nice, play nice, cross your legs, don't make a fuss, if someone wants a hug, give them a hug, don't say no. Like we're constantly taught to override our nervous system and to override our inner knowing and just comply, comply, comply. So I think it's just through little steps of starting to reframe that, starting to own your yes and your no while you're pregnant is huge. And honestly, like that's just through practice. And then I think like one of the most powerful ways that we do practice that in my work in like midwifery or like my own personal work is that I'm asking moms those questions and I'm always trying to give them as much autonomy and as much power and choice in their decisions as physically possible. Also, too, like not stepping into the space of savior, like not coming into the place of I'm going to save you for things or I'm going to tell you what's best for you. It's simply just telling the woman, I trust that you know what is best with you. And we ask questions and we counsel and we talk. But I think a huge, big piece of it is just knowing your yes and knowing your no. And that's just so much of it, like you said, too, like there's a lot of fear around home birth, and so many women they come and because they know intuitively somewhere deep down, they know that this is the right thing, but they're seeking approval. Right? Like they're seeking approval, like, tell me how it's safe, tell me the things, tell me what you're going to do, tell me how you're going to ensure, because really we have to prove to society that we're still being that good girl, that we're not being fringe, we're not being whatever. That's a huge piece of it.
Yes, it is. And that makes me think about your time in Peru, where you recently spent some time
Mm.
there, and birth is still honored in a sacred way there. What did you witness there that felt radically different from what we see here, what we've been talking about, and how we're having to prove ourselves? And from what I gather of what you had shared with me, it's just a very different way that they hold this space and time for women.
Mm. Oh my gosh, yeah, I had such an amazing time in Peru. Honestly, so much. I mean, there's so much that I could say, but I think some of my most favorite things that kind of pop to the surface of my mind and kind of in relation to what we've been talking about so far is that in Peru, like in these indigenous communities where birth is still remembered and practiced to this day as sacred, it's community. So, in a community, when a woman becomes pregnant, there's this idea that it's not just her and this family that's pregnant, but it's the community that's pregnant. And they all come together and to support her. And there's this awareness for how to take care of mothers in their pregnancy. There's this awareness for how it is a time of vulnerability for mothers. It is a time where they're extra sensitive. It's a time where they're going through this initiation. So there's this great reverence and this great understanding for how to treat pregnant women. For example, like they wouldn't go up to pregnant women and tell her this like awful birth that happened yesterday and all these crazy, terrible things that happened because they understand like the imprinting that's happening and they seek to protect her and like to guard her. And I know we talked about this during your time together and some of your experiences. But yeah, in our culture, like there's none of that. And in fact, we do the opposite. Like we think we're helping pregnant women by telling them all these treacherous, horrible stories so that they will seek out this highly controlled pathway. Because what kind of mother would choose a path that doesn't guarantee like the absolute, live birth of her baby? Like that's just what a horrible mother. So there isn't any of that there. It's like this beautiful understanding that she is going through this deep initiation and there is no guarantee and we don't know what she's going to meet on the other side, but we will hold her through it. Like we will nourish her and love her and support her so that she can go through whatever is the destiny of her birth and pregnancy. It's so beautiful. And the other thing that I really love that really stuck out to me, like in a similar line, is that because they hold women and pregnancy and birth in this way with such reverence and much sacredness, and because the whole community does come together to take care of this woman, babies and pregnancies are considered a sign of abundance. Like there is no negative, bad, or horrible pregnancy. Like, despite how it was conceived, despite if it was conceived out of violence, there is no like judgment and shame about how or why someone got pregnant. There's just babies are believed to bring abundance to the community, no matter how they come. And that really stuck out to me as well, too, because that's also so disconnected from our community. I mean, I think we can all resonate. I mean, myself as well too. I think when we're all deciding when to have a baby, we're trying to make our life perfect first. We don't have enough this, we don't have enough that. It's coming at the wrong time. Like, how am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? And the thing is like we can have compassion, we can understand that because we don't come together to support mothers. Like many mothers, when they're pregnant, we like to talk a big talk like pregnancy is a blessing and it's beautiful, but we totally abandon mothers and leave them all alone. We don't have maternity leaves. I mean, the list goes on and on. So it's understandable why we don't have that frame of reference here in the West, but that was such a beautiful thing. And it makes so much sense because our womb spaces are spaces of abundance. Like they're literally spaces of creation. Fertility is literally a space of abundance. But women are taught from a young age as well, too, in communities in Peru where like the sacredness is still intact, that they're taught the sacredness of their bodies and they're taught that understanding. So all of these experiences are just done with so much more intention. The last thing I'll just say as well too is that in Peru, that birth with these traditional midwives is like night and day. And it was so beautiful. One of the days, a traditional Andean midwife came down to where we were and spent a few hours with us, and we got to ask questions about their practice. It was a male, which is not uncommon in this community in Peru. And when you're in his presence, you can understand. And when I heard that he was a male before I went to Peru, I initially was like, oh, like that's like very interesting because that's not really like an energy that I would necessarily like feel inviting into the birth space. And so I was just like, I was very interested in what that experience was going to be like. And when you're in his energy, you can totally just understand. It was so joyful and light and happy and almost like this like young grandfather play with their grandchildren like kind of energy. It was just like so sweet. But we got to spend time asking him questions. And they believe they don't touch mothers at all in the time of pregnancy and birth because they recognize her body as such a sacred portal that they don't touch. And then as the baby is being born and crowning and the head is being born, they don't touch babies and they don't touch their heads because they believe that all of the baby's chakras are open at the time of birth and especially vulnerable. So they're not touching during that process. There's just so much sacred container being held, so much prayer, so much reverence. It was a really beautiful experience.
That does sound beautiful. And it's fascinating about the male and how it was so accepting there, but because the energy was so different. Whereas I think
Mhm.
here in the Western world, it's woman led because we're reclaiming so much of that. I think we'll
Yes.
probably get to a point where it will be more balanced, but that really stuck out to me too of we, I think, as women right now are really safeguarding midwifery
Mm,
and holding that space woman to woman because it was taken from us. And so I'm sure there's some
mm,
healing that we'll have to do there. But do you want to share anything about that?
mm. Oh my gosh, yeah, that's so true. I mean that's so 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 resonant. And I think also too like while you were speaking like everything you said I totally agree with and makes perfect sense. And I think to continue on with that same thought, because of that, because of how midwifery and birth was like stolen away from women in this very like patriarchal sense, I think the idea of having a man in birth doesn't necessarily feel good over here because how we are training men and even women now, because there's lots of women doctors, but how we are training people in the obstetrical model of care is this very authoritative, authoritarian. I know what's best for you. You better listen to me and do right and behave. That's that energy. And that is like an unhealthy version of masculine, right? Not that men are wrong or bad, but it's this unbalance of energy. It's that unbalance of masculine energy that took midwifery away from women and is still trying to control it. So, yeah, what you said makes so much sense.
Yes. Okay. I want to expand a little bit more about hearing if there's any other rituals, rhythms, or attitudes towards birth that you use or know of in your practice that you feel our culture has forgotten and you want to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things for me is holding space for birth to be a ceremony. And there are a lot of more like practical things that you can do, creating altars, setting intention, all of these things that are really beautiful and that I talk with my clients a lot about to just enhance their experience. But really, truly, that birth, no matter where it is, how it happens, or how it unfolds, it is a ceremony. The birth is a ceremony itself. And so, really holding space for that. And that's part of that mystery. When you're trying to seek control and all of those things, you start to lose essences of that ceremony. For me, it's a real communication of mother with herself and her own spiritual beliefs. Birth is a very, very spiritual event for myself. And I think for a lot of women and a lot of families, it's a time where they are connecting deeply with their relationship of higher powers or those invisible realms. So just holding space for that is something that is forgotten and often doesn't happen in hospitals and centers where there's policies and regulations and all of those kind of things. But like I said, you can even just hold in your heart that no matter where you end up birthing for whatever reason, that birth in and of itself is the ceremony. And then I think a couple other things that I've tried to bring back from the past to create more sacredness for women and to create more experience for them to feel into their intuitive and embodied selves is mother blessings. So I try to talk to moms a lot and reframing kind of your traditional baby shower into like a mother shower because kind of like I said before, it's not that we don't love babies, we love babies. And I think what babies need the most is their mothers. And so I think a lot of times, again, it's that kind of like outsourcing and that complying that everybody wants to celebrate the baby. So the mom just kind of like lets everybody like celebrate the baby, even though she might be lacking in like emotional support. She might be lacking in comfort. She might be lacking in the ability to pay for her midwife or to pay for the care that she wants. She might be lacking in all the ways, but she just quiets and she just keeps this quiet and she accepts toys and clothes and things for the baby that's not really nourishing her. So kind of starting to reframe that and using mother blessings to start to honor the mother. And there are so many different ways that this ritual is carried out across different cultures and different communities and like different women, but it's a time to really nourish the mother and fill her with all of that support so that she can feel empowered and strong and confident to cross that threshold that she's going to have to do for her baby. Another thing that I offer is a special ritual and ceremony called closing of the bones, which is becoming more popular in the West. It's becoming more remembered, at least in the home birth communities. But this is a ritual that's carried out in the postpartum time. And similarly, like there are similar postpartum rituals that have very similar names and very similar processes that are carried out across the world through different cultures in different ways. The way in which I practice it is through the Mexican lineage where I was trained and a lot of where my own personal heritage and influences a lot of the way that I practice. But it's a beautiful ceremony that honors the mother after birth and it honors this like coming back into her body because we know that during pregnancy and birth, women have to open and expand so much to create, receive, and then bring their baby onto the other side of earth. But then in order to mother your baby, then you have to be back into your body and you have to be grounded again. And not only for that, but also to prevent like more susceptibility to illness, to disease, to like postpartum depression and anxiety, things like that. Our ancient ones understood these processes, and so they created these types of rituals that would honor and help mothers come and return to their body. So it's a beautiful ceremony that wraps a mom in like rebozos and held and holds and contains her, and it has like other elements in as well too.
Thank you for sharing all of those. Those are really
Yeah.
beautiful and so important to remember. And I love that you're shifting a lot more of the focus to the mother. Baby is there too, and that will never go away. But this remembrance of mother, and that shifts my thoughts into the postpartum period, which I think is so important
Hmm.
for us to talk about because from my own experience, that is where I have felt the least amount of care and the least amount of support to just bounce back, to come back into who you were and all the ways that you need to show up when in reality everything has changed in your life. You have changed as a person. And so what do you see that pressure doing to women and families, and how in your model of care or even in your imagined most beautiful abundant space of culture where we really hold women, what would that look like?
Yeah, such an important question too. I think even in like the home birth and the crunchiest spaces of pregnancy and birth, sometimes we're still really like fundamentally lacking in postpartum and in this area. I think on the microcosm, the way in which it affects like the individual mother and herself is we can see a rise in postpartum depression, anxiety, pelvic floor issues. We like make light of things like, after we have our baby, like we pee when we cough and it's just like normal or whatever. It's again like this disembodiment and this lack of body literacy and this just like accepting that this is just the way that it is, even though it's a result of like severe lack of support and lack of nourishment. I think from the microcosmic level, I think from a macrocosm, I mean, I think what it's doing is for generations now, we have been systematically devaluing mothers and devaluing motherhood. And, you could talk about that from different perspectives. Like, I think a lot of it's what we have started to condition women to believe what determines like value. So in society today, we determine our value through external product, like through making money or through rising on the corporate ladder or being independent, like all of those things. That's what we have started to learn is what creates value in our worth. And because of that, we have decreased the valuing of mothers. I think it also like impacts on a larger societal level is like moms are not being able to bond with their babies. I mean, we don't have maternity leave. Like so many states still don't have like a very basic maternity leave. We're pressuring mothers to leave their babies and creating a space around where that's normal to leave and abandon your babies. Like we've forgotten the entire physiology of mother baby as a unit, which there's a lot of physical and biological evidence that shows that mom and baby are one unit and that babies don't identify really as a separate person from mothers until really like the upwards of 9 months of age. But we're creating this entire culture and system around this normalcy of separating moms and babies, which I think is doing like really severe psychological and physical damage on a lot of moms and a lot of women in society in general. I mean, I think in a perfect world, I think after birth, I would love to see returning to more things like what we experienced in Peru, which is this cultural knowing of how to support and take care of women that, birth and motherhood and pregnancy would return to a community event again, and that we would be able to we'd check in on mothers, that we would know again, like what's helpful and what's not helpful. Like a lot of families, after a mom has a baby again, everyone comes over and they want to hold the baby and play with the baby. And again, it's like moms are just there, non-existent, bleeding, surviving, trying to come back. And no one's asking the mother, like, how are you? Like, what do you need? What can I do for you? And even moms having a hard time feeling guilt, expressing that they might need help. This idea that we're supposed to do everything on our own. And that means that we're a good little girl, that we did it on our own. We didn't ask for help. So I would love to just see more awareness for all that mothers go through in the entirety to create, grow, birth their baby, and then raise their baby, that we would hold more value and reverence for motherhood and that what it means to be a mother, which is just huge, monumental.
Yes, I think there's so much that needs to shift, and yet it starts here in these conversations and these ways of practice that you and so many others are beautifully holding and supporting to help us remember and to help us reclaim this power, this understanding, and really, I think just this healing. That's what I feel when
Mhm.
it comes down to it. It is a deep healing that happens when we start looking at this differently and we show up differently. Our babies feel it, our families feel it, our communities feel it.
Yeah, it does surface to mind like another thing that was so powerful in Peru is like this idea that mothers create culture. This is like a belief that they have in their society that mothers create culture through birth. And that just like, oh, that like resonated with me to my bones. And it kind of like when you talk about this, as we bring more awareness and we do this, we offer more healing, like collectively and individually. And it's true. I mean, I think mothers do birth culture, and you can so easily see that, like here in the West, where birth is met with fear, it's often very violent and it's very controlling. And then, I mean, look at our society, look at our systems and our government and all the global things that are happening in the world today. It's based off of so much fear of separation, and we're raising like we're separating babies from their mothers, and we think babies don't have feelings, babies don't know, babies aren't intelligent, but they are. And so we're raising them in this like perpetual feeling of abandonment and insecurity and fear. And so when we grow up, like what do? We create systems, culture, and society that's based off of insecurity, fear, abandonment, violence, aggression. Like it's a mirror, and speaks so much to why I think birth matters so much and how we care for mothers matters so much.
Yes. Could you imagine if we change that? If where we have a culture
Ugh.
that actually remembers it's sacred and that we need support and that we shift things to offer that, so much would change. And what can we do now from where we sit as partners, as mothers, as friends, as just community to others to be able to help each other start to shift that as a culture? If we aren't in the birth centered work, if we're not in that area, but we are human and I believe so passionately in this, what can we do from our seats to help shift this as a cultural aspect?
Mm. Oh, that's a great question. I think honestly, one of the biggest things probably for that is starting to have conversations around birth and mothering, and for people to start honestly, truly like valuing the mother and valuing birth. I think birth has to start being had in conversations as more than just like a product of a baby, that more like we just get pregnant and we just go through this thing just so we can have a child on the other end, that and then that they're gonna grow up and produce in society and do all these things for us. But we have to start talking about birth in a different way, that birth matters in a different way, and start being more open to that. And on the same lines, like that, as well as mothers too, is like mothering is so much more than just like raising a child that makes it to a certain age or becomes, productive in a society. But mothering has huge psychological, emotional, spiritual effects on the individual and the society. So I think just starting to have more conversations around that, because really and truly, like even today, like a lot is coming up in politics about health and the environment and toxicity, things that I get really excited about, but still just not much about birth, like our maternal mortality rate is rising. Like babies going to the NICU and the hospital is rising, and still people are flooding into the hospital system. These systems, these places where these horrific outcomes and rates are increasing and increasing every day, but people are still flooding to these places. So I think we need to start remembering that birth is a normal event. It's a normal event, like so many things in our life. It's not a medical event. It's not something that needs to be managed. And start asking questions. Start asking your moms and your grandmas and your aunties about their births and what that experience was like. Start asking, questions about your own body. Start reclaiming, listen to that little voice inside you because it matters. The birth matters.
Yes, what I keep seeing is it even starts with this reconnection back to the land, a reconnection back
Mm.
to our body, a reconnection back to each other, and that allowance to get a little dirty, to get in the fear, to get in the grief, to allow the aspects like you talked about, the death and all those things that we want to just push away. Like I think of how we over sanitize, how we run to the hospital for every little cough. We don't trust in ourselves anymore. And that is
Mhm.
where we have an opportunity to say, this isn't how I want to live anymore. But I think every person will have to come to some space where they have a moment that unfortunately probably brings them to their knees or really shows them, oh, this is the disconnect. But for us who just are living, who maybe don't have children, who are witnessing though mothers and others, like no matter where you sit, you are affected by children, by this process, because like you said, it brings and births our culture. And if we're trying to instill and create a new way, which I think many of us, especially us here listening, are, and we see the cracks in the system, this is where it starts. It starts
Mhm.
with this process and this beautiful sacred unfolding, this initiation that we go through and we hold, whether we're in it or not. And then from there, I think it moves into, right, how do we raise our children? How are we supporting? But that
Mm.
first 40 days, first year is so important.
Mhm. Yeah, it just while you were speaking, it was just reminding me that like birth can often be for many people the catalyst into seeing and recognizing, kind of like how you were speaking, all the ways in which we've been conditioned to outsource so much of our own inner knowing and our own power. Like I know that it was for me. I know that birth was like the start down the rabbit hole into so many other systems and areas of life and health where we have just been taught to believe that we don't know anything. And people who don't know anything and who aren't in their power and in their intuition, they're more easily controlled. They're more easily manipulated, and the gives more power to those like controlling the systems and the societies. So yeah, I feel like birth is honestly one of the things I think in our world today that is the catastrophically most misunderstood thing. Well, it is still like 90 something percent of people that are going to the hospital to have their birth. So most people who you pass on the street are going to have this idea of birth is like that they can't do it on their own, that they have to go to the hospital, that it's crazy. Birth is this scary, fearful thing. I mean, I can't really think of anything else in the world that honestly is quite as like conspiratorial, like just really and truly, like the vast majority of people have no understanding of the true raw nature of birth. And so once you enter into that rabbit hole, it often can be the catalyst to all the other ways in which we are just outsourcing ourselves and have been taught not to trust ourselves and what we know and the design of our bodies to be self-healing. I mean, we don't have to tell our bodies to do so many things that keep us alive and that heal us, and we get over illnesses and we get over things. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. That leads me back to healing, which makes me think of postpartum, which brings me
Hmm.
back to really the focus of postpartum of I think midwifery offers a really different lens
Hmm.
and support system, at least thankfully. I'm so thankful for it. You held me for 6 weeks, but it's different. I think the way you showed up was very different from my other experiences. And I want to hear what you would have to share about what would the first 40 days and beyond ideally look like for a mother and their baby to really support them and nourish them as they're moving through this transition and healing.
Yeah, there is an idea of the first 40 days across many cultures, across more indigenous cultures who still hold this wisdom and reverence for pregnancy and mothers who are still, it's still intact and they're still practicing it to this way. There is this idea of the first 40 days as being um, an especially protective time for moms and babies where really deep healing and deep bonding of mothers and babies and breastfeeding and all of that stuff is very vulnerable and it's just happening and it's just sprouting. So I think for me, like what I've tried to do personally in my own practice and it goes along with this idea that during this first 40 days, women and babies should be inside and in their home, and they should be catering to rather than the opposite. So many practices, honestly, whether it's home birth or birth center, and of course, hospital as well, too, so many of these practices are still functioning in a model where it's like, there's maybe one or a couple days at home, and then it's like 2 weeks, and the mom is expected to be getting in the car and driving back to their visit or having to go back to receive their care and their support when they're still bleeding, still healing, still in this really vulnerable liminal space. They're not fully in their body yet. They have to go out into the world where they're very like open and vulnerable to energies and all kinds of things. And we're sending them out. And I think it goes to like, the creating of all those postpartum issues. So in my perfect world, I mean, it would start with moms and babies just being at home. And so in my practice, I do all postpartum check-ins for moms and babies in their home until at least that 6 weeks time. And then I know, like, and for you, even at 6 weeks, you still weren't fully ready to like venture all the way out so far away. And it's such a big thing. And it reminds me, in Peru, they believe that in the postpartum, women are still in these deeper states of consciousness and these deeper states of like spirituality and these other kind of world realities that you're in when you're pregnant and where you go to meet and birth your baby, that you're still in it in postpartum and you're only slowly like starting to come out. And we're just asking women to break, that barrier way too soon. So I think keeping moms and babies in their home, keeping their ability to bond with their babies intact. So that looks like feeding moms, nurturing moms. That looks like when you come over, asking what the mom needs, like not the baby. Maybe that's, offering to do the dishes, fold the laundry, walk the dogs. It's friends and community rallying to come together. It's dropping off food and meals. And it's also resourcing partners as well, too. I think that's a new one that's like starting to get more talked about. But when we think of layers of support, mom's first layer is often going to be her partner or the father, but then he too needs a layer of support because in order for him to fully support her, he's got to be supported himself as well too. So starting to talk about what that looks like, what are building your layers of support. There's some grief a little bit, I think, in the idea that we have to like pay for those layers of support where back in the day it would have been our families, it would have been our grandmothers and our aunties and our cousins and everyone else coming together and knowing how to support these mothers. And that's kind of fallen away. And as we've moved away and society has become, pretty big. But I think that it comes down to then just making a decision of knowing what you value and really planning for those layers of support in pregnancy so that you have them.
That's what I learned so deeply the more and more babies I got through and just really how valuable that support was. I think the first one or
Mhm.
two, and this is something interesting, I'm curious what you have to say of why does our culture give so much love and support to that first baby someone has? But as I go through my fourth, everyone's like, oh, which baby? Is it your first? And you say no, and they go, oh, you've got it. You're fine. I think that's another layer of just like hands off, right? They have it. They don't need me. I think it's just
hmm
really fascinating. I don't know if you have anything you want to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, that's so funny. I do see that a lot too. There's so much like drama and excitement for the first, and then it just like starts to dwindle. And I don't know, I think it probably has to do along those similar lines of just like we have so much focus kind of like on the prize or something, and babies are cute and everyone wants to come over and they want to hold the baby, but we just don't have this awareness or this understanding anymore of like the mother and the mother baby relationship. And then I think too, probably just lots of generations of women who've been made to have to tough it out and do it on their own. And this idea that I got through it and I was fine and you're fine. And so, what's the big deal? It's like the age-old saying, like, we did it that way and we're fine. And I'm always just like, but are you? Like, I think our idea of fine is like a whole other rabbit hole that we could go down. But I think just a lot of like generational repetition of like, yeah, that's what I had to do, and you'll be fine too. If I
Yes.
didn't need it, you don't need it.
Yes, exactly. I think you're right on the nail with that one. And I have one last question for you, which is if you could share one message with every pregnant woman or
Mm,
mother listening, what do you want her to remember?
hmm I think it really just comes back to a lot of what we talked about. And I think if there's one thing I want women to really know who are pregnant, are planning to be pregnant, is really and truly that your body was designed in so many ways to do this, and that it is a time where you will feel the most empowered in your entire life, like through you, and opportunities to reclaim. And I would just urge moms to not allow the fear to prevent the crossing of that threshold. And because also, too, a lot of our wisdom cultures who still hold pregnancy and birth as sacredness, they also understood that fear isn't something to avoid. It isn't something to shame. And it also isn't something that just because you're afraid means that it's wrong or that you're making the wrong decision. But they often viewed fear as a very like integral and important and meant to be part of the design. Like if you're doing it right, if you're doing it well, if you're doing the initiation, there's undoubtedly going to be some fear because that's part of the initiation. That's part of the challenge. So trying to just acknowledge that for yourself and to hold space for yourself to maybe go through that so that you can then know and reclaim for yourself of what you're capable of. I think everything changes when we allow ourselves to not fear our own bodies anymore and to not fear our own power. Everything in your life will change.
That was beautiful, Kayla. I think that's a beautiful way to end this conversation. And I just want to say thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom, for holding me and my family the last year.
Mm,
Gosh, it's gone so fast.
I
It's
know.
amazing. So before I let you go, will you share with my
Mhm.
listeners where they can find you, where they can learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do have a social media, although regrettably I'm not super active on it. But my Instagram is Kayla Gomez Midwife. And then, so I am a midwife who practices locally in Colorado Springs. I have a office here. My personal business is called Sacred Birth Midwifery. And then I do work alongside and collaborate and attend births through Organic Home Birth as well too in their collective. So searching either of those practices is how people can find me if you're interested in working with me, if you're interested in having a home birth. My home base is in Colorado Springs, but I do travel for birth. I don't have a harsh limit on that. It's kind of more of a one-on-one connection.
That's amazing. Highly recommend her.
Yeah.
Anyone listening or wanting to get pregnant in the area. So thank you, Kayla, again for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Olivia. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for being here today. I am truly grateful you chose to spend this time with me and be a part of this community. If this episode resonated, I'd love for you to leave a rating and written review because it helps Intuition Unlocked reach more women who are ready to live clearer, bolder, and more self led. As a thank you, screenshot your review and email it to me, and I'll send you a resource to support your next step. And until next time, root into your truth, rise into your power, and radiate your light.